In this video, I'm going to cover female reproduction. Now, the exact location of these parts on the models we're using is on another video. So this is going to focus on functions, so you know the functions of these parts, as well as the female menstrual cycle in terms of hormones and so on. Alright, so here's your basic anatomy. We're going to go the ovaries, the fimbria, oviducts, uterus, vagina, external genitalia. Again, we'll look at each of these individually. So the ovary is where oocytes and follicles develop. Oocytes, the typical word which you hear that called as eggs, but their technical name is oocytes. I'll explain what a follicle is later. Basically, it's an oocyte with cells around it, and the ovary developed from the same tissue as the testes did in males. So in a developing fetus early on, the ovary and testes are the same until the hormones come in, and then they will become either ovaries or testes. Oviducts, which you commonly know as the fallopian tubes. The oviducts are where fertilization is going to take place. This is where the sperm and egg will come together. This is a picture. Actually, I had an ovary removed several years ago. It had ruptured. There was a cyst and it ruptured, so you can see the ovary. You can see the oviduct before they took it out. It's about 3 times bigger than it was supposed to be due to that ruptured cyst. This is not mine, but this shows you the ovary, the uterus, the oviducts, and the ovary with a cyst on it, which fills with blood. And then when that ruptures, it can be pretty painful. So the oviducts have these things called fimbriae. Fimbriae are what's going to cause the egg when it is released to head towards the oviducts. There's the space between the ovary and the oviducts, and that space, the egg can actually sometimes escape out into the rest of the body, as can the endometrial tissue, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So there's a gap between the fimbriae and the ovary. An ectopic pregnancy is one where the embryo implants outside the uterus, most commonly in the oviducts, and this can be very, very dangerous to the mother. The baby's not going to survive, and it can cause the mother to bleed to death if they do not remove that in a timely fashion. So here you see a developing embryo, and it's actually in the oviducts as opposed to the uterus. The uterus is where implantation and embryonic development occur. The myometrium is this thick muscular layer of the uterus. The uterus is going to contract monthly during a woman's period or during labor. The endometrium, this is a layer that increases and decreases in size based on hormonal responses on a monthly basis. It's also where implantation is going to take place of the developing embryo if fertilization takes place. Endometriosis is when this endometrial tissue escapes from the uterus through the oviducts and through that gap I talked about into the abdominal cavity. I even heard cases where endometriosis is found in the lungs of women, and it can be very, very painful. This is a uterus with a fibroid. This is actually mine back when I had that ovary removed. My uterus has been since removed, but this is a fibroid. You can see this blood in here. That's because of that ovarian cyst that ruptured. They actually removed that fibroid, but then unfortunately it came back. This is the cervix. The cervix is the end of the uterus. It's the place where cells are taken for a pap smear to test for abnormalities and possible cancer. The vagina is the passageway for the infant and for menstrual flow. It's also where the penis is inserted during sexual intercourse, and that is the vagina. The hymen is at the end of the vagina. It just blocks that opening. It is usually not there when a woman gets to puberty. If she uses tampons or sports or whatever, it can break that structure. The external genitalia, we've got the labias. The labia majora is the larger of the two lips, and that's what labia means. The minora is the smaller of the two. Okay, the hymen you would see here at the end of the vagina. The urethra is where urine is going to come out. And the vulva is the name for all of this external genitalia. Oh, real quick back here, the clitoris is the most sensitive area for a female when she feels an orgasm. That's where that is stemming from. That is similar to the glans penis in terms of structure in the male. Now the menstrual cycle. You're going to need to know this in multiple choice format. This is a picture of the whole thing, which you have in your packet. Menarche is the woman's first menstrual cycle. The ovarian cycle is what is going on in the ovary, which you'll show in this area. The uterus, uterine cycle is what's going on in the uterus down here. This is what's going on in the brain, or the ovary, I'm sorry. These are the ovarian hormones, and these are the hormones stemming from the brain. So ovarian hormones, what's going on in the ovary, what's going on in the uterus. And so a typical cycle length is 28 days, but that is average. Most women are going to vary, even from month to month. What's going on in day 10, you can see what's happening in the uterus, you can see what's happening in the ovary, you can see what ovarian hormones are being secreted, and what's going on in the brain. Ovarian phases during a woman's period is called menses, and that's going to be from 1 day, sometimes up to 7 days. This is when the uterus is shedding its endometrial lining, so you see that lining going down here. The follicular phase is during the development of the follicle. It ends at what's called ovulation. Ovulation is when the oocyte leaves the follicle from the ovary. This is when a woman is most likely to get pregnant if she has sexual intercourse. And the luteal phase is after the follicular phase, days 14 through 28. We'll talk about why it's called the luteal phase. That is when possible implantation can be taking place. The uterine has phases too. The menstrual phase is the same, days 1 through 5 or 1 through 7. The proliferative phase in the uterus is here, and this is when the endometrial lining, which I'm showing you right here, is getting bigger. It's proliferating in response to hormones. And then the secretory phase starts at ovulation, and the uterine lining is maturing for possible implantation, and it ends when the menstrual phase starts. So when the period begins, and we'll talk about what causes that. So I guarantee you will see 2 or 3 questions asking you the name of phases, either in the uterus or in the ovary. So you need to make sure that you're comfortable with when those are occurring. Ovulation is always the end of one cycle and the beginning of the next. All right, basic stuff. The oocyte contains genetic information. As we've learned in the past, there are 23 chromosomes in the oocyte and 23 chromosomes in the sperm. Females will be born with all the oocytes that they will ever have. So the eggs you have at 30 are the same ones that you were born with. And most of them have actually died since you were born. So it's a pretty rare cell in the body as compared to the sperm, which can develop throughout a man's life after puberty. His numbers will decrease as he gets older, but he's capable of making sperm throughout his life. The follicle is the oocyte plus the structures around the oocyte. And what you're going to see during the phases is that the follicle, the cells around the oocyte, are going to change in response to hormones. So the oocyte is the egg surrounded by cells. Those cells are going to grow and change in response to changes in hormones. All right, so let's start. What happens in the brain is you have this gonadotropic releasing hormone, which you just need to recognize as GnRH. It is secreted from the hypothalamus, and when implantation has not occurred, so a woman's not pregnant, what will happen is the hypothalamus will stimulate the production of what's called FSH and LH to be secreted from the pituitary gland. You're just going to need to know the abbreviations for these: follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. So when the menstrual cycle or the period starts, then what will happen is this follicle stimulating hormone and LH will start the development of one of these follicles. These are called primordial follicles because you are born with them. Notice they're very small in the oocytes inside them. So what will happen is one of these will start to develop in response to these hormonal changes. Why does one start to develop and not another? We don't know. It usually alternates between the ovaries from month to month, where it'll happen in one and then happen in the next, the other ovary the next month. What will happen next then is these 2 hormones will start the development of a follicle, the maturation of a follicle. And what I want you to notice is as this follicle gets bigger, you see the amount of estrogen increasing in the ovary. Estradiol is just another word for estrogen. So notice the follicle, the cells around, here's the oocyte, the cells around it, as you get more cells, you get more estrogen. So the estrogen level is increasing. And as that estrogen level increases, what it's going to cause this endometrial lining to increase. So follicles maturing secretes estrogen. The estrogen is going to cause the endometrial lining to grow. Here just gives you the arrows. You can go through this several times. If you need to replay it, do so you know what's happening. And then what happens is when the follicle becomes mature, you're going to see a dramatic jump. You're going to see a dramatic jump in estrogen. When that follicle is pretty much saying, you know, we're mature, we're ready to go, we want to ovulate, then that estrogen level will jump. And then what you see that estrogen cause is you see it cause in the brain this thing called the LH surge. This LH surge is a dramatic increase in luteinizing hormone caused by the estrogen, which is caused by the mature follicle. What does the LH surge cause? It causes ovulation. It causes the release of this oocyte into the oviducts, and it ends the follicular phase of the ovary and the proliferative phase of the uterus. And so this is when one parts of the cycle end. This one is a woman is most likely to get pregnant if there are sperm waiting there during this phase or during this ovulation, then she's most likely to get pregnant, which is in the middle of the cycle. What happens then is the oocyte heads down the oviducts, but what is left from this follicle is called the corpus luteum. So that's why this is called the luteal phase. So you still have these cells of the follicle that are left in the ovary. What the corpus luteum is going to do, it's going to secrete progesterone and estrogen. So you see here, you have this progesterone and estrogen that are being secreted by the corpus luteum, which is going to further maturate or get the uterus prepared for implantation, because this is when possible fertilization has occurred and implantation may go on. This progesterone keeps this estrogen in check. So without this progesterone, what can happen is the estrogen lining can get overly thick, which can cause a heavier period in a woman. Now, what will happen is this is also a time during the cycle when the ovary will not develop any new follicles, because there's still a chance that the oocyte that was released can get fertilized and possibly implant. So the pill that women take actually keeps their hormone levels right here. And what that does is it stops the process of follicular development and stops the process of ovulation because there's no follicle there. So again, this takes you through it step by step. You may need to watch it more than once. Okay. As what happens then is after a couple weeks, if no fertilization has occurred, then you're going to see a significant drop in progesterone and estrogen. So this corpus luteum only lives for 2 weeks if there's no fertilization. And so if there's no fertilization, these hormones drop, and that stimulates the sloughing off of the endometrial lining or the woman getting her period. And that's what happens most of the time. Then what happens is that sloughing then starts the cycle over again because no pregnancy has occurred. If fertilization does occur, what will happen is the embryo will secrete a hormone called HCG, which is what pregnancy tests are looking for. And again, you just need to know the abbreviation. What HCG does, it keeps the corpus luteum alive and keeps it secreting estrogen and progesterone, and so the endometrial lining will not slough off. A woman won't get her period, and until the HCG keeps working on the corpus luteum until the embryo gets old enough to secrete its own hormones. So again, with HCG present, in the case of having a developing embryo, a woman will not get her period because that corpus luteum will stay alive, and she will not get her period. So that's the basics of the cycle. Any question I ask you on this is going to be in multiple choice format. You need to read this over and over again, do the practice test, and then you need to check off on this station. You need to check off on this station and check your answers with me.